That was one of the things, that was in the toolbox as I came to set, is really having that understanding of where they were, and ideas of how and where they're going, and ideas of how to kind of root them in the moment.
Well, just to start off, Tom, as the creator, I wanted to start with you and just ask, can you just share a little bit about how this story originated?
At the beginning, there were two things that came together. One was a really amazing podcast by a retired FBI agent called Jerry Williams, who is a consultant on the show. And she had a long and prestigious career, and she started this FBI podcast where she's interviewing retired agents. And they're like an hour and a half. And I always found them completely I was rooting around for interesting crimes. That was my reason for stumbling across it. And then very quickly, within like 10 episodes, I suddenly realized these agents were like really interesting, complicated figures, and I love the way that each of them had a different storytelling voice, the way they approached. Some were sort of into minutiae, some were kind of very dramatic, some were matter of fact, some were quite emotional. And I was like, oh, they're really varied. And I was curious at how agents sometimes on television can be flattened out a bit. They can seem almost like they're just serving a story rather than being interesting in their own right. And I wonder whether that was a problem of the form, whether somehow if you're always chasing a criminal, there are limitations on what you can do with character. So I was like, how can you come up with a different form, storytelling form, that would put all the emphasis on these agents and how interesting and complicated they were? And so that impulse was really married with a love of a class photo and thinking, characters over time. When you're standing in that class photo, you're imagining your future, what you're going to be and who your friends are going to be. And so in this, you have the Quantico class photo and you're trying to imagine where they will end up. And so those two things got married together, and that was how the piece started.
Well, I know that you worked on another miniseries. You worked on the crime anthology American Crime Story, but Class of '09 feels to be very unique from your other projects. So was there anything about this that made you feel out of your element, or were you really able to pull from your past experience in the genre to create this?
I love genre. I think I've always loved genre. I think genre is really interesting. What I like doing is using, and I love the conventions of it as well, but using it in a slightly different way of trying to like make it feel like you're both talking to the other pieces that have existed, but your own thing. And I think and I think this is true with all writing, once you really love an idea, it kind of grows out of that and what is particular about it. So this was about, as I said, trying to root it in a character story rather than necessarily the criminal, and how you make the criminal secondary. Like with this piece, the way the time structures the work, you're jumping in at the end of cases often rather than the whole case, because you're seeing the impact both on that agent's career, but also emotionally. So it just offered up lots of different opportunities of different kinds of storytelling. And I didn't set out with the desire to be different. I think it just comes out of trying to just tell that what is particular about that story.
Joe, I know that you were also involved in American Crime Story, and you've also done work on things like Black Panther. So where does Class of '09 kind of fall for you in regards to the type of genres and stories that you're interested in telling?
I love things that have great characters within genre. So a big palette with great characters within. And I think People vs. OJ, I think Black Panther, and I think Class of '09 all fall in that bucket. And I think that's what drew me. One of the things I think that drew me to this project was the early scripts that I read, and how he wove character and traversed kind of genre through character and told this story in a very unique way. So I think that was I think what initially drew me to the material and kept me excited as I worked on it.
Jessica, you've done a number of productions in different genres. So, what is it that really drew you to this project? What do you feel is unique about this story in particular?
Echoing a lot of what both Tom and Joe have said there, I think the way that we play with genre particularly, but do it in a very different way, dare I say, subverting the genre at moments. And I think using the format of the limited series is such an optimum way to do that, because we have a certain size canvas in which to stretch those three timelines, but one that is still finite. We know it's not a procedural. It's not about, as Tom said, what are the cases that we're solving kind of week to week. So it gives it a certain shape, but with a lot of room for flow over the course of those 8 episodes, where you can really weave those three timelines together. So for me, having done very, very different limited series, what I loved about this one was that it felt like nothing I'd ever been involved with before. It does involve law enforcement, but not in kind of the conventional genre way. It does involve science fiction and technology, but not with the usual tropes that we know from films about AI. So I feel like it played with a lot of familiarity, but also tweaking those things that you think you know. And the relationships between the characters too felt very unexpected and surprising in those ways.
Well, Tom, I'll address this one to you, but obviously you can all speak to this. But, what really made you decide that you wanted to alternate between the past, the present, and the future rather than a linear structure? Was that always the plan from the get-go, or?
Yeah, it was always the plan in the sense that, when you're looking at a class photo, you're both in that moment of seeing who they are, but also they're thinking about the people they want to be. And then you're kind of seeing in the future this kind of retrospective element. And as I mentioned, that podcast, these are agents that are retired. So they're looking back at why they joined, which again are the dreams, and the thing that happened in their career, and then obviously where they are right now and where the institution has ended up. And they often have very complicated feelings across all the different timelines in that conversation. And one of the interesting things, actually, we were mentioning on genre is the procedural form in television, which is often a case a week, really has nothing to do with the reality of an FBI agent. They can spend years on a case. They're like working on, I'm a book writer as well. They talk about their cases, and I never thought about it like this before when I was listening to this podcast. They talk about their cases like the book they're most proud of. They've invested 3 years on this case, and it worked, and they did some good, and they had other cases that they spent 3 years on. It was a fiasco. It didn't turn out the way they wanted. They were frustrated. So I was like, that's very different from the way we see television, where it's like you start, here's the beginning, and here's the end. So time was built into the story that in these podcasts I was listening to. So I was like, time became a very important element in the show, and that 3 storyline enabled you to do and represent those cases in a very different way. So it was kind of integral from the beginning. Yeah.
Kind of along what you were saying. I mean, people change over time, characters change over time. So, and again, this could be for any of you, whoever was working most with the actors, but what kind of work did you guys do, given that they are essentially playing, multiple versions of themselves over these episodes?
Yeah, one of the challenges was tracking emotionally and relationship wise where characters were, because we weren't shooting in order, and so that was one of the things that was in the toolbox as I came to set, is really having that understanding of where they were, and ideas of how and where they're going, and ideas of how to kind of root them in the moment. And we, that was a very collaborative process. They had tons of ideas of their own. And so it was tough at times, but it's great work and very exciting.
Well, it looks like I am going to have to wrap, but thank you guys so much for chatting with me about the show.
Oh, it was lovely talking to you.
Sure, thanks. All right. Bye, guys. Have a good one.